the point is that if you ask in that context, well, what makes a song a worship song, or what makes it a congregational song? It's like, are you leading it on Sunday morning for people to sing along to? Right. Then congratulations, you got yourself a worship song, right? That's what does it. Now you could say content matters too. Like if you got up and said, everybody on the count of three, kumbaya, or row, row, row your boat. Let's four-part harmony. Let's sing it together. That wouldn't make it a worship song, but nor is it the content only. It's the context in which it's dropped. If you drop it into a worship service in the hopes that other people will sing it with you, because if they're not going to sing it with you, it's called a special, right? That's a contemplative piece. But if you want multiple voices, right, and it's going to be about or pointing towards Jesus in some way, congratulations, Drew, you got yourself a worship song. All right. So in that context, then you don't have to, like, it's not about like, well, is it maximally or minimally singable? Right. Is the theology good? Is the theology bad? Like those are questions that you can ask, but they're not what's going to make or break as whether it's a worship song. It's kind of like if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, then quack, quack, you got yourself a duck.
Okay. That's helpful. And in some ways, it defeats the more myopic focus on the functional parts, because I do get a little hung up on, well, if we're not all singing it together, or if everybody doesn't know it. And I do have as you know, because we've had these conversations, a special place in my heart for ritual and the rituals of the church and the importance of rituals in the Bible. And I do think at some point when it comes to singing in worship, there's something magical about singing that I don't think anybody has cracked the code on yet. Like something about music, it can be the same words, but when set to music, something changes, and something about what it means to be a human, quite honestly, I think. But there, well, now what was I going to say about that? Sorry, I got caught off with the magic of music.
You should insert like a dream sequence that
yeah. No, I completely derailed myself. What was I saying just before then?
Ritual.
Oh yeah, ritual. Thank you. So there's something about the ritual too, is that if you're constantly in learning mode when it comes to, even like if you go to a high liturgy church and every week, I always like to imagine, if you go to a Catholic church or just a high liturgical church, Lutheran, Anglican, or whatever, it's going to take you a few weeks to learn this stand up, sit down, kneel, where, we do things this way. But after a while, and at first, it's very difficult to be worshipful, I think, in your disposition while you're just trying to learn the movements, right? But after a while, you learn how to worship through the movements because the movements kind of move to the back. And you can move other things to the front of your attention. And so I think if you had like different songs every single Sunday that are difficult to learn because they don't have that kind of repetition to them or something, or that easy to kind of see through what's going on with them, it's like going to a Catholic Mass, but they change the movements every single week, right? And so I do think there is a question for worship leaders as to how much you should lean into. There's a book that calls it the near and dear music, the stuff that, like How Great Thou Art, Amazing Grace, the stuff that you don't even need to think about. Everybody can kind of belt it. So I think you've moved us off kind of trying to diagnose why Amazing Grace works in so many situations, like especially ecumenically. And but the content issue is the one, I think content and style as well when it comes to like the Psalms, obviously. Here's my beef. I'm going to diatribe for a second, and you can push back because I know you have good pushback on everything here. Is that I know very few Christians that know any of the worship songs that Jesus sang, and don't know how to sing them and don't have any like musical access to them whatsoever. Now, obviously, any musical access we have to the Psalms would be ones that we'd have to reinvent, but like nobody's in my world, outside of a few places that you and I would know of, nobody's even trying. So that to me is a big red flag, right? Like content and style, and like what would the appropriate content for a worship song be? Well, for Jesus, the appropriate content for his scripture would be complaining to God that he's not stepping in and doing the things he's supposed to do. Right. And ending it by saying, why, God, why? Not but I trust in you. I mean, that sometimes happens as well, right? That would be a lot of the content of the Psalms. So I think as this is my jujitsu turn to the Old Testament.
You did it.
When we do think about content, I do worry a little bit that we are so out of sorts with the worship music of Scripture, and often like out of sorts, like we don't even pay attention to it at all. It's not even part of our forming network. And when it comes to worship, that when we do read the Psalms, we look at it and we're like, I don't even know how anybody could ever sing this, right? Like it feels completely foreign to us as worship. So do you see that? Am I overstating the case, or do you have any hope on the horizon that that's connected, or do you think this is like not a big deal and I'm being Chicken Little here?
No. Let us know more about this guy and how it's falling. No, there's something to it. This is a genuine question for you. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. Like, do you know in what ways the Psalms would have been used in synagogue worship during the first century?
Synagogue worship? No, I mean we have some ideas from the Haftarah and the singing of. We know that they would have been sung. You mean like in like what the liturgy would consist of?
Well, just you mentioned like, hey, this is well said. You're like, this is Jesus's worship songbook, whatever, his hymn book.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, but practically speaking, like I had this dim sense. I'm like, I know this was used. But I don't know how. I often say like, hey, these songs were sung, these Psalms were mostly sung, although I doubt many people did Psalm 119 all that often. But yeah, how were they actually used in the original context?
Yeah, well, and so it's interesting you asked synagogues, because part of it is clearly not synagogal. So the songs of ascent are meant to be as you're ascending to Mount Zion, right? And you might sing those at home doing a virtual pilgrimage as well, because we have archaeological reasons to believe that maybe that's what they were into, is virtual pilgrimage as well. But yeah, we just, I think we find the references to it in Second Temple Jewish literature, a lot of reference to the Psalms. You find, surprisingly to me, honestly, you find a lot of bald reference, and by that I mean like they just refer to it as expecting you know what they're talking about, to the Psalms in Polycarp, Ignatius, Augustine. I mean, Augustine is constantly quoting the Psalms.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't seem to know the Old Testament that well, but what he knows is he knows well, Psalms. And he knows the Psalms.
Yeah.
So it's certainly passed on from the kind of the Jewish transition into the welcome Gentile and the kind of completely Gentilic church. Certainly, Psalms is one of the things that passed on very heavily, but
right.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm
good.
Sure somebody knows out there, and they can.
Well, I'm sure they do. I've tried to do a little bit of looking, and it's not easy. It's not easy to find. Let's be honest. So if you're out there and you're listening and you want to do a dissertation, then now's the time.
Someone would know. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for indulging me in that.
Hey there, if you've benefited from this content at all, please hit the like and subscribe, or subscribe and like, one of those or both of them together on this video. It helps us tremendously with the math algorithm nerd monsters.
Yeah, the question is this a problem? I mean, and the thing is, I think it probably could be. And so we've steadily moved into what Mark thinks at this point in time. Well away
Let's
from
go
research,
there.
But good.
You've got the experience.
My wife is now turning off the podcast. Okay. So the thing that right away I thought of, I was like, well, I wonder if I just look at my experience of the worship songs, like without trying to search them, without trying to chat GPT this, and I was like, just think back in the songs that I know. What psalm-like material is creeping to the surface? Because as you mentioned, these early Christian writers, it's possible they just studied the Psalms really well, or as I just taught my students earlier on today, it's also conceivable that they were so much easier to remember these things because they were attached to mnemonic devices. Like if you sing something, Augustine says or at least we quote him as saying, "He who sings prays twice." And so, like the idea of the Psalms, like if they were set to music, it's much more likely that they would be more easily embeddable in someone's, both in their psyche and also kind of in their, to use a fancier word, in their heart, right? Like it actually, because it kind of like via your affections, it's more likely to kind of put it deep in there. So for myself, I'm like, okay, what about the Psalms? Like what comes out? And so there's a very popular worship song that's called Goodness of God. And it was popularized, I think it came out about 5 years ago. And it was definitely like number one CCLI, huge hit. And the bridge, so the kind of third part of the song, right, which is also a new thing. We never used to have bridges. We just had
bridges, big bridges now.
Yeah, if you're lucky, you had a chorus back in the day, but now you
giant
have verses,
bridges,
you have
with a huge build-up crescendo, right?
Yes,
Like that's the thing.
In one of these giant crescendo bridges, the lyric says, "Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me."
Oh yeah, okay, I know this song.
So to me, this is clearly an allusion to Psalm 23, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, surely your goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And there's also a much less popular, but somewhat popular song called Surrounded, which actually Michael W. Smith popularized the chorus for a few years ago, but it was not written by him. It was actually released by a church called Upper Room, which is a interesting church in Dallas, I believe. And the verses of the song say, "There's a table that you prepare for me in the presence of my enemy. It's your body and blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles." And then the second verse says, "In the valley, I know that you're with me, and surely your goodness and mercy follow me." Now, obviously, Psalm 23 is, as it has been it's described in the kids' Bible that I used to read to my son as David's number one hit. So Psalm 23, obviously, it's one that you can dip into much more easily. Now, the thing that you mentioned to me offline before we came in there was like the imprecatory Psalms and how people feel about using those in worship. I would just say, even before I bring that up, like, do you consider, and this is kind of a rhetorical question, but you can answer if you want, like, do you consider those allusions to a psalm in a song as being psalm material, or should it be unequivocally, now we're going to sing Psalm 23? Because I can think of some versions of Psalm 23 that I learned as a kid, and I can just tell you that the kinds of churches that I'm used to will not be singing that song on Sunday, because there's something about the aesthetic and the format that are just not going to allow that to happen.
Yeah. I actually do have an answer to that question.
Okay,
it's my strictly my opinion, obviously,
Yes.
but it's based on another podcast we did with poor Bishop Hooper, who did the Every Psalm Project.
Yes.
And in talking to them, I don't remember if it was in the interview or afterwards, because I talked to them for quite a while afterwards, because it's just a fascinating songwriting team, husband and wife songwriting team. And, one of the things they said, because they were, I would say yes, if it has strong allusions, because actually what they're doing, they wrote a song for every psalm. And they said, well, it's kind of physically impossible to write out every lyric of every song. Like, some psalms just did not lend themselves to putting the entire psalm in. So they would truncate it. They would make a poetic allusion to a section of the psalm. And also they said, look, for modern ears, we like choruses. Forget about bridges. We just like choruses. And there are zero choruses in the psalms. So they would sometimes basically find a pithy or easy way to pitch a chorus in there. And Psalm 88, I think, Psalm 88 will blow your mind. If you don't listen to anyone, listen to Psalm 88 that they did, every psalm for Bishop Hooper, where the chorus is just the repetition of "Darkness is my only friend," and it's like, man, talk about
that will not be a CCLI number one.
Yeah, I mean, capturing the soul of a song without repeating every single word of it. Like, they just did a brilliant job. So yeah, I do think actually, if you're making strong, if it's the source material from which you're kind of reforming the ideas in a new song, yeah. And I've definitely heard some CWM, Christian worship music, today that I've heard that I thought, oh wow, that actually is really powerfully echoing a lot of things that you hear across several psalms, maybe not even one psalm. You see this, the early Christian church writing hymns, possibly even Paul's alluding to an early Christian hymn in the letter of Philippians, right? So you see this kind of retooling of hymnic thinking. So yeah, I'm all for that. I think I sit through a lot of worship music where I'm like, that ain't it. That is neither sourced nor alluding to any psalmic thinking or theology or,
So what is it? Was it the lack of content? Was it the way that it was phrased? I mean, because the Psalms, like you say, it's I can't remember who says this. I think it was Martin Luther who said the Psalms are like a little Bible. So the Psalms contain within it the themes of the whole Bible. And if all of our songs are in some respects reflecting on Christian themes, then I'm like, you can see how I could say like, hey, look, check it out. This is definitely nested somewhere in Psalm 37. Like, just get a dig deeper or whatever, look for the connections. So then when you hear a song and it's in your own words, that ain't it. Right. What is it specifically about that you think is just not hitting?
Wait, you're on my podcast. I'm not on yours. I mean, the typical things you can guess, they're very me-centered, right? They're very about God healing me of certain... nothing that's wrong, I don't think. I think it's the center mass has shifted, or shift doesn't equal. So when I asked poor Bishop Hooper, which is a husband and wife team, what surprised you as you worked through the Psalms? What kind of surprised you in the material? And they said, yeah, we just did not realize how much lament there is in the front half of the Songbook. And it's just a lot, and it's over and over and over and over again. And then I think, when was the last time I heard any worship song that was a genuine lament?
Yeah.
Like, I am mad at you, God. I don't understand. You have wronged us. Why would you do this to us? Like,
yeah.
And I feel like that just the proportions of worship music, and maybe this gets back to the curating issue and what kind of makes it to the front, and why these lists of top 25s are so could be beneficial but could also be dangerous, is they push the proportion into God, you're great, we love you, you love, or you love us, and here's what's great about us worshiping you, and it doesn't really prepare people emotionally to be mad at God.
Yeah, but it's so hard to do that in a group setting. So I had a friend who would say, like, he just pictured trying to like lead one of these lament psalms and being like, hey guys, so glad you come to church today. Would you stand up and let's all lament together? Like there's just, the context of our churches, not all churches, but the kind of ones that we're talking about, they really just don't lend themselves to that. And the idea that you said, like, the Psalms, the songs that you're kind of a little bit kind of ruffle your feathers or whatever are very me focused. That's the thing that I find super surprising myself. I mean, I've been reading through the Psalms now I've read them my whole life, but like intentionally over the last almost decade or so, they have been my kind of daily bread. And I still am surprised that every time I turn over, I'm like, I still don't remember this. So my memory is terrible.
Right.
But I am always amazed at, like, there's a lot more than we in the Psalms. Yeah. So they're super personal. Like, they're really about, like, the psalmist is always saying I this and I that. And sometimes it's I praise you, but a lot of times it's like I'm mad at you. And it's a weird thing, Drew, to try to lead a diverse group of people down. It's one thing to try to lead a diverse group of people up. So you come into church and people are in all different kinds of moods or whatever, and there's arguments and there was missed alarms and blah blah blah. It's one thing to be like, you know what, but God is good. So let's aim up, let's kind of like allow him to bring us up. It's a whole other thing to be like, you had a great week, and you got the raise, right. Things are firing on all cylinders with your relationship. Now we really want to bring it down. We want you to be upset. We want you to bring it before God right now. It's just like, I feel like we're not ready as a culture to even consider that.
We're not emotionally mature enough in church culture. And again, I was a pastor, and you just know the fact is 10% of the people walked into that room and they are down, and they do need the laments, right? Sure, they need to be able to voice with the people next to them. In the same way that, a lot of Psalms that talk about how I'm going to praise you in this and I'm going to praise you in that, and I'm going to be, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to, these kind of superlative versions of me, kind of like wedding vows that are complete lies. Like, what day of your marriage have you ever completed all of your wedding vows, right?
Oh, I hope my wife is still listening.
So it's funny that oaths and vows in Scripture do not take that form. And not only that, but there's like admonition against rash oaths, and be very careful. And there's lots of stories of people making rash oaths that, are horrible for them and the people around them. And so I just can't even sing the words, because I'm like, that is not true of me. And I'm not even sure if that's supposed to be true of me.
Yes.
So I'm going to praise you in every single thing, and I'm going to find joy. I'm like, I think I'm actually supposed to be down and lamented at certain points, and there are people in this room that certainly feel that way. And yeah, I would love to have. I get you're leading them, but I think maybe the culture that says we have to be joyous and up and in awe of God 100% of the time is it's disconnected from how the way the biblical authors talk about reality and describe reality. And B, maybe that's just not emotionally healthy for us.